Jake Thompson sat in the back row of the large classroom, looking around at his strange classmates. The room was huge, with seats made for all kinds of different body shapes. Some students had 6 arms, others floated in the air like clouds, and a few looked like giant insects. Jake was the only human in the class. The classroom was on Kepler 442b, a planet far from Earth. Jake had come here to study at the Galactic Academy of Survival Sciences. It was the best school in the galaxy for learning how to stay alive in dangerous places. Getting accepted was hard, but Jake had always been good at outdoor survival. Professor Zixthara stood at the front of the room. She was tall and looked like she was made of blue crystal. Her voice sounded like wind chimes when she spoke. She taught the hardest class in the school, called Primitive Shelter Construction. "Today, I will give you your final test," the professor sighed. Her crystal body glowed brighter when she was excited. "You must build a shelter using only what you find in nature. No tools from your home worlds. No technology. No help from others." Jake felt nervous, but also excited. He had been camping and hiking since he was a kid. His father had taught him how to build fires and find food in the woods, but this was different. This was a test that would decide if he passed the class. The other students seemed worried too. Vexmar, who had 6 arms and came from the Krellian Empire, was clicking his claws together. Clicktar, an insect-like student from Zephyria, was making buzzing sounds. Wisp, who looked like a floating purple cloud, was changing colors rapidly. "Each of you will get a different environment," Professor Zixthara continued. "You will have 72 hours to finish your shelter. The test starts tomorrow morning." Jake heard some of his classmates whispering about him. They spoke in their own languages, but the translation device in his ear let him understand them. "Poor human," said a student who looked like a walking tree. "Humans have no natural weapons or armor. How will he survive?" "I heard humans are weak," added another student with scales and gills. "They can't even breathe underwater or fly." Jake tried not to feel bad about their comments. He knew humans were different from other species. They didn't have claws or the ability to shoot poison. But his father had always told him that humans had something special. They could think and solve problems in ways other creatures couldn't. Professor Zixthara began pulling cards from a silver box. Each card had a picture of a different environment. "When I call your name, come forward and pick your test location." One by one, students walked up to pick their cards. Vexmar got a desert environment. Clicktar picked the swamp. Wisp got a frozen mountain. Jake watched as each student looked at their card and either smiled or looked worried. Jake Thompson, the professor called Jake, stood up and walked to the front of the room. He could feel all the other students watching him. He reached into the box and pulled out a card. On it was a picture of a forest with tall trees, a small stream, and rocky hills. "Temperate forest," Professor Zixthara announced. "You will have oak trees, pine trees, birch trees, and access to fresh water. The temperature will range from warm during the day to cool at night." Jake nodded and walked back to his seat. A forest environment sounded good to him. He had spent many summers camping in forests, just like this one back on Earth. After all the students had picked their cards, Professor Zixthara explained the rules. "You may bring only basic clothes and emergency medical supplies. Everything else must come from your environment. You will be watched at all times by cameras, so no cheating. The test begins at sunrise tomorrow." The class ended, and students started leaving. Jake heard more whispers as he packed his things. "The human will probably build a simple lean-to," said a student with 4 legs and fur. "That's about all his species can manage." "My cousin studied humans," added a student with tentacles instead of arms. "They're smart, but they're not very good at physical tasks." They don't have the right body for building. Jake wanted to tell them they were wrong, but he decided to let his work speak for itself. He had learned from his father that actions were more important than words. That night, Jake lay in his small dormitory room thinking about the test. He remembered all the times his father had taken him camping. They had built shelters together using only materials from the forest. His father had taught him which trees were best for building, how to make tools from stones, and how to create fire without matches. "Son," his father had said during one camping trip, "other animals might be stronger or faster than humans, but we have something they don't. We can look at a problem and figure out not just how to solve it, but how to solve it better than anyone else." Jake smiled, remembering those words. Tomorrow, he would show his classmates what humans could really do. He wouldn't just build a shelter. He would build something that would surprise everyone. The next morning came quickly. Jake put on his simple clothes and gathered his small medical kit. He felt ready for the challenge ahead. As he walked toward the testing area, he saw his classmates heading to their own environments. Some looked confident, others seemed nervous. Professor Zixthara was waiting at the entrance to the testing domes. "Remember," she said to all the students, "you have 72 hours. Use your natural abilities and instincts. May the best student win." Jake stepped into his testing dome and heard the door close behind him. The forest stretched out before him, looking just like the forests he had explored as a child. He took a deep breath of the clean air and smiled. It was time to show the galaxy what humans could do. Jake stood at the edge of the forest and looked around carefully. Other students would probably start building right away, but Jake had a different plan. His father had taught him that the most important part of any survival situation was to understand the environment first. He walked slowly through the forest, studying everything he saw. The trees were tall and healthy. There were oak trees with strong, thick trunks, pine trees with long, straight branches, birch trees with white bark that peeled off in sheets. Jake smiled when he saw the birch trees. His father had shown him how useful birch bark could be. Jake found the stream that Professor Zixthara had mentioned. The water was clear and cold. He knelt down and cupped some in his hands to taste it. It was clean and fresh. He followed the stream for a while, noticing how it curved around rocks and created small pools in some places. Near the stream, Jake found clay soil. He picked up a handful and squeezed it. The clay held its shape well. This was important. Clay could be used to seal gaps and hold stones together. His father had taught him that clay was like nature's glue. Jake spent hours just walking and observing. He found a rocky area with many loose stones of different sizes. Some were flat and smooth. Others were rough and sharp. He picked up a piece of flint and smiled. With flint, he could make tools and start fires. While Jake was exploring, cameras were recording everything he did. In the main observation room, professors and students from other classes were watching all the test subjects on big screens. "Look at the human," said Professor Grextan, who taught combat survival. "He's been walking around for hours. Why isn't he building anything?" Professor Zixthara watched Jake's screen with interest. "Perhaps he's confused," she said. "Humans are known to overthink simple problems." On other screens, Jake's classmates were already making progress. Vexmar was using his 6 arms to weave a shelter from desert plants. His natural ability to make sticky thread from his body helped him bind everything together. Clickdar was digging a complex tunnel system in the swamp, using her strong mandibles to cut through roots and rocks. Wisp had found a cave in the frozen mountain and was sealing the entrance with compressed gas that hardened in the cold. Each student was using their species' natural abilities to solve the shelter problem. But Jake was still walking around, picking up rocks and examining tree bark. The watching students began to whisper. "The human is wasting time," said a student. "With scales. He should be building something simple before it gets dark." "I feel bad for him," added another student. "Humans just don't have the right instincts for this kind of work." Jake couldn't hear these comments, but he wouldn't have cared anyway. He was learning everything he could about his environment. He tested the wind patterns by throwing small leaves into the air. He noticed that the wind usually came from the west, which meant he should build his shelter facing east to avoid the worst weather. Jake found an area where the ground was slightly higher than the rest of the forest. This would be important for keeping his shelter dry if it rained. The spot was also protected by large trees that would block strong winds. As the sun started to set, Jake finally began to work. But he didn't start building a shelter. Instead, he started making tools. Jake picked up a piece of sharp flint and a strong oak branch. He had watched his father do this many times. Using a rock as a hammer, he carefully chipped the flint to make it sharper. Then he used strips of bark to tie the flint to the end of the branch. It took him over an hour, but finally he had a simple stone axe. The professors watching were confused. "What is he doing?" asked Professor Zixthara. The assignment said, "No tools allowed." "Maybe he doesn't understand the rules," suggested another professor. "Should we disqualify him?" "Wait," said Professor Grextan. "Let's see what he does with it. The rule says no tools from their home worlds. But he's making this tool from materials in the forest. That might be different." Jake tested his stone axe on a dead branch. It worked well, cutting through the wood with several strong swings. He smiled and began making more tools. He created a stone knife using a smaller piece of flint. He made a wooden hammer using a heavy piece of hardwood. As Jake worked, he explained his actions to himself, a habit he had developed as a child. "Dad always said that the right tools make any job easier," he whispered. "Other species have natural tools, claws, strong teeth, extra arms. Humans have to make their own tools." The other students watching Jake's screen were becoming interested, despite themselves. They had never seen anyone make tools from scratch before. Most species either had natural tools or used manufactured ones. Jake's next step surprised everyone even more. He began cutting down small trees with his stone axe. It was slow work, but he was patient. He cut several pine trees and a few oak branches. Then he started stripping the bark from birch trees, creating long sheets of white, waterproof material. "What is he planning to build?" wondered Click-Tar, who had finished her tunnel and was now watching Jake's screen. "It must be something big," said Vexmar. "He's gathering a lot of materials." Jake worked through the night, preparing his materials. He cut logs to the same length. He stripped bark and collected clay from near the stream. He gathered stones of different sizes and shapes. By morning, he had a large pile of building materials ready. The professors were amazed by Jake's work ethic. "He's been working for almost 20 hours straight," observed Professor Zixthara. "Most species would need rest by now. Humans are known for their endurance," said Professor Grextan. "They can work longer than most species, even if they're not as strong." Jake finally took a short break to eat some berries he had found and drink water from the stream. He looked at his pile of materials and smiled. He had everything he needed to build something that would surprise everyone. As the sun rose on his second day, Jake began the real construction. He started by laying out the foundation using the largest stones he had collected. He arranged them in a rectangle, making sure they were level and stable. The watching students were getting excited. "He's building something much bigger than a simple shelter," said Wisp, her gas form glowing with curiosity. Jake began placing his prepared logs on top of the stone foundation. But he wasn't just stacking them randomly. He was cutting notches in each log so they would fit together perfectly. This was something his father had shown him in old books about how humans used to build houses hundreds of years ago. "It's like a puzzle," Jake said to himself as he worked. "Each piece has to fit just right." The structure was starting to take shape, and it was unlike anything the alien students had ever seen. Jake wasn't just building a shelter, he was building a home. Jake's second day started with the sound of his stone axe hitting wood. He had already cut down several trees the day before, but now he needed more. The structure he was planning would need many logs, all cut to the right size. The watching professors were amazed at how efficiently Jake worked. He would examine each tree carefully before cutting it down, choosing only the straightest and strongest ones. When he cut a tree, he did it in a way that made the tree fall exactly where he wanted it to. How does he know where the tree will fall? Ask Professor Mortek, who taught advanced physics. He's calculating the weight distribution and wind factors perfectly. Jake had learned this skill from his father during their camping trips. "Son," his father had said, "a good woodsman never wastes energy. Plan your work, then work your plan." After cutting down a tree, Jake would remove all the branches and strip off the bark. He used his stone knife to cut notches in each log. The notches were shaped so that one log would fit perfectly on top of another, creating a strong connection without any gaps. The other students had never seen anything like this. Vexmar had finished his woven shelter and was now watching Jake scream with fascination. "The human is building something that looks permanent," he said. "Most shelters are just temporary protection." Kliktar agreed. "My tunnel will keep me safe, but his structure looks like it could last for years." Jake worked steadily through the morning, placing log after log. The walls of his building were growing higher. He had to be very careful to keep everything level and straight. Each log had to be placed perfectly, or the whole structure could become unstable. The most difficult part was lifting the logs into place. Jake wasn't as strong as some of the other species, but he was smart about using leverage. He created a simple pulley system using ropes made from twisted bark and a strong branch. This let him lift logs that would have been too heavy to move by hand. "Ingenious," said Professor Zixthara. "He's using mechanical advantage to overcome his physical limitations." Jake also began preparing a special mixture of clay and moss. He had learned about this from old survival books. The clay would harden and seal gaps between the logs, while the moss would provide insulation to keep the inside warm. He worked carefully, pressing the clay mixture into every gap between the logs. This was called chinking, and it was essential for keeping wind and water out of the building. Jake's hands were getting cut and dirty from the rough work, but he didn't stop. The alien students watching were starting to understand that Jake wasn't just building a shelter. He was creating something far more advanced. The walls were thick and strong. The construction was precise and professional looking. "Where did he learn to do this?" wondered Wisp. "This looks like advanced engineering." Jake's father had taught him that humans had been building log structures for thousands of years. Before we had modern technology, his father had explained, humans had to build homes that would protect them from weather, animals, and other dangers. They learned to use the materials that nature provided. By midday, Jake had completed the walls of his structure. It was rectangular, about 10 feet long and 8 feet wide. The walls were 4 feet high, which was perfect for a human. To move around inside comfortably. Now came the most challenging part, building the roof. Jake had to create a frame that would support the weight of the roof materials while also shedding rain and snow. He used longer logs to create a slanted roof that would let water run off easily. Jake cut smaller branches to create a framework for the roof. He laid these branches close together, creating a solid base. Then he began laying the birch bark sheets he had prepared the day before. The bark was naturally waterproof, and Jake overlapped each sheet like shingles on a house. Professors were impressed by Jake's understanding of water management. "He's creating multiple layers of protection," observed Professor Grextan. "Even if one layer fails, the others will keep the interior dry." As Jake worked on the roof, he began preparing for something that would truly amaze everyone watching. In one corner of his structure, he started building something that looked like a small tower made of stones. "What is that?" asked Kliktar, pointing at Jake's screen. "I'm not sure," said Vexmar. "It doesn't look like any shelter feature I've seen before." Jake was building a chimney. He carefully selected flat stones and used clay to hold them together. The chimney would allow smoke to escape safely while keeping rain out. This was technology that most alien species had never developed. Not at the bottom of the chimney, Jake built a fireplace. He used large flat stones to create a safe place where he could burn wood inside his shelter. The fireplace was designed to contain the fire while radiating heat into the room. "Fire?" said Professor Zixthara with surprise. "He's planning to use fire inside his shelter? That's incredibly dangerous." But Jake knew what he was doing. Humans had been using controlled fire for thousands of years. His father had taught him how to build safe fireplaces that wouldn't burn down the surrounding structure. Jake tested his chimney by lighting a small fire and watching the smoke. It rose up through the chimney and escaped outside, just as he had planned. The stones around the fireplace stayed cool, proving that his design was safe. The alien students were amazed. Fire was known to most species, but very few had learned to use it safely indoors. The idea of having heat and light inside a shelter was revolutionary to them. "This changes everything," said Professor Mortek. "Indoor fire would allow survival." In much colder environments, Jake wasn't finished yet. He began working on other features that would make his shelter more comfortable. He built a raised platform for sleeping, using smaller logs and pine branches. This would keep him off the cold ground and provide a more comfortable place to rest. He also created a simple table and some shelves using flat pieces of wood. These weren't necessary for survival, but they would make life much more pleasant. During the 3-day test. As the sun started to set on his second day, Jake stood back and looked at his work. The structure was nearly complete. It looked like a small log cabin, the kind that humans had built for centuries on Earth. The watching students were quiet, staring at Jake's creation with wonder. They had built basic shelters that would keep them alive. But Jake had built something that looked like a real home. "I've never seen anything like this," said Wisp, her gas form glowing with admiration. "It's not just functional, it's beautiful." Jake wasn't done yet. He had one more day to add the finishing touches that would make his shelter truly special. As he settled down to sleep on his raised platform, with a warm fire crackling in his fireplace, he smiled. Tomorrow, he would show them what humans could really achieve. The professors in the observation room were having heated discussions about Jake's project. Some thought it was too advanced for a primitive shelter test. Others argued that Jake had followed all the rules and should be judged on his results. "He's not just surviving," said Professor Grextan. "He's thriving. This is what makes humans special. They don't just adapt to their environment, they improve it." Jake woke up on his third and final day, feeling rested and warm. While his classmates had spent cold, uncomfortable nights in their basic shelters, Jake had slept soundly on his raised bed with a fire keeping him warm all night. He had built something that wasn't just functional, it was comfortable. The professors watching were amazed that Jake looked so refreshed. "Look at him," said Professor Zixthara. "He's not showing any signs of stress or exhaustion. The other students look tired and worn out." Jake had learned from his father that comfort wasn't just luxury. It was important for survival. "A well-rested person makes better decisions," his father had always said. Take care of your basic needs first, and you can focus on other challenges. Jake began his final day by working on details that would make his shelter even better. He started by building a proper door. Using branches woven together tightly, he created a door that would fit perfectly in the entrance he had left in one wall. The door was held in place by hinges made from twisted bark and wood. Jake had to be very careful to make the hinges strong, enough to support the door's weight while still allowing it to open and close smoothly. "A door?" said Clicktar, watching Jake's screen. "Why does he need a door? Our shelters don't have moving parts." Jake understood something that the other students didn't. A door wasn't just about keeping things out. It was about controlling the environment inside. With a door, he could keep heat in during cold weather and let air flow through when it was. Warm got next. Jake worked on his water system. He had noticed that rainwater ran off his roof in a predictable pattern. Using carved wood pieces, he created a system that would collect this rainwater and direct it into a container he had made from a hollowed-out log. The water collection system was simple but effective. When it rained, clean water would flow from the roof into Jake's container, giving him a steady supply of fresh water without having to walk to the stream every time he was thirsty. "Water collection," said Professor Mortek with amazement. "He's thinking about long-term survival, not just a 3-day test." Jake also improved his ventilation system. He had learned that even with a good chimney, a closed shelter could become stuffy and damp. He carved small holes near the top of his walls and created covers that could be opened or closed depending on the weather. The ventilation system would prevent moisture from building up inside the shelter, which could cause problems with mold and rot. It also helped control the temperature, letting hot air escape during warm weather. But Jake's most impressive work was on his heating system. He had built a good fireplace, but now he wanted to make it even better. Using stones from the stream, he created a thermal mass heater around his fireplace. The thermal mass heater was a system his father had shown him in old books. The stones would absorb heat from the fire during the day and then slowly release that heat throughout the night. This meant the shelter would stay warm even after the fire died down. Jake also created channels in the floor using small stones. These channels would allow warm air from the fireplace to circulate throughout the shelter, heating every corner evenly. It was like a primitive central heating system. The watching professors were speechless. "This is advanced engineering," said Professor Grexstan. "He's created a complete life support system." Jake spent time making his shelter more comfortable in other ways, too. He built better furniture, including a more comfortable chair and a larger table. He created storage spaces for food and supplies. He even made a simple broom from tied twigs to keep his shelter clean. Everything Jake built had a purpose. The raised bed kept him off the cold ground and provided storage space underneath. The shelves kept his tools and supplies organized and easy to find. The furniture made daily activities more comfortable and efficient. As the day progressed, Jake decided to test his shelter under difficult conditions. He had noticed that the testing facility could simulate different weather patterns. He requested that they test his shelter with a storm. The artificial storm was intense. Rain poured down, winds howled, and the temperature dropped significantly. Jake's classmates huddled in their shelters, trying to stay dry and warm. Some of their shelters were leaking or being damaged by the strong winds, but Jake sat comfortably in his log cabin, reading a book he had made from bark pages. His fire was burning warmly, his shelter was completely dry, and he was protected from the wind. The storm that was making his classmates miserable was just background noise to him. "Incredible," said Professor Zixthara. "His shelter is performing better in the storm than some permanent buildings I've seen." Jake even cooked a meal during the storm. He had set traps earlier and caught some small animals. Using his fireplace, he cooked them into a hot, nutritious meal. The smell of cooking food filled his warm, dry shelter. The contrast between Jake and his classmates was dramatic. While they were struggling just to survive the storm, Jake was living comfortably. He had created not just a shelter, but a home that provided everything he needed for a good life. The alien students watching were beginning to understand something important about humans. They didn't just survive in difficult environments. They found ways to thrive and be comfortable even in harsh conditions. The human isn't just enduring this test, observed Vexmar. He's enjoying it. He's made something that's actually better than some of the dormitory rooms at the academy. Jake spent the evening making final improvements to his shelter. He added decorative touches that made it feel more like a home. He carved simple designs in some of the wood and arranged his furniture in a pleasing way. As the test period neared its end, Jake sat by his fire, warm and comfortable. He had built something that exceeded everyone's expectations, including his own. The shelter was strong, comfortable, and efficient. It used resources wisely and provided everything needed. For a good life, the professors were calling emergency meetings to discuss Jake's project. They had never seen anything like it in all their years of teaching. Jake had taken a simple assignment and turned it into something extraordinary. This changes how we think about survival, said Professor Grextan. Most species focus on enduring harsh conditions. Humans seem to focus on eliminating those harsh conditions entirely. Jake looked around his log cabin one final time before going to sleep. Tomorrow, he would present his work to the professors and find out his grade. But win or lose, he was proud of what he had accomplished. He had shown that humans might not have natural claws or armor, but they had something just as powerful: the ability to imagine a better situation and then make it real. That was what made humans special, and that was what would help them succeed among the stars. As Jake drifted off to sleep in his warm, comfortable bed, he smiled. His father would be proud of what he had built. More importantly, he had proven that humans deserved respect in the galactic community. The 72-hour test period was over. Jake stood outside his log cabin, waiting for the professors to arrive for the final evaluation. He looked at what he had built and felt proud. The cabin was strong, warm, and comfortable. It had everything a person needed to live well, not just survive. One by one, the other students emerged from their testing environments. They all looked tired and dirty. Some had cuts and bruises from working with rough materials. Their shelters had kept them alive. But it had been a hard 3 days. Vexmar came out of his desert environment looking exhausted. His 6-armed body was covered in sand, and his woven shelter had barely protected him from the harsh sun. Kliktar emerged from the swamp, with mud covering her insect-like body. Her tunnel system had worked, but she had spent 3 days in a dark, damp hole. Wisp floated out of the mountain environment, looking dimmer than usual. Her gas form was flickering weakly. The cave shelter had protected her from the cold, but she had struggled to stay warm without any heat source. All the students gathered in the main evaluation area. Professor Zixthara stood before them with a tablet containing their test results. Behind her, a large screen showed images from each student's testing environment. You have all completed the most difficult test in our survival program, Professor Zixthara began. Each of you has shown the natural abilities of your species. Now, let us examine your work. The evaluation began with Vexmar. The screen showed his woven shelter in the desert. It was a complex structure that used his species' natural threading ability. The professors noted that it provided good shade and protection from sandstorms. Excellent use of natural abilities, Professor Zixthara said. This shelter demonstrates the traditional survival methods of the Krellian people. Next came Kliktar's tunnel system. The cameras showed a sophisticated underground network with multiple chambers and escape routes. It was perfectly suited for her insect-like body and provided protection from all the dangers of the swamp environment. "Very impressive," said Professor Mortek. "This shows advanced planning and excellent use of your species' digging abilities." Wisp's cave shelter was simple but effective. She had sealed the entrance with hardened gas and created a safe space to wait out the mountain storms. It wasn't fancy, but it had kept her alive in a hostile environment. Each student received praise for their work. Their shelters were exactly what the professors expected, basic protection suited to each species. Natural abilities. The students had passed the test by doing what came naturally to them. Then it was Jake's turn. The screen showed his log cabin, and the entire room fell silent. Even the students who had been watching him work were amazed to see the complete structure. The cabin looked like something that could have been built by professional construction workers. The walls were straight and strong. The roof was perfectly waterproof. Smoke rose from the chimney, showing that the heating system was still working. "This is unexpected," said Professor Zixthara. She looked at her tablet, checking the rules of the assignment. "Did the human use any forbidden tools or materials?" "No," reported Professor Grextan, who had been monitoring Jake's work. "He used only materials found in the forest environment. He made his own tools from stones and wood, just as the assignment allowed." The professors began a detailed inspection of Jake's cabin. They tested the structural strength by pushing on the walls. They checked the waterproofing by pouring water on the roof. They examined the fireplace to make sure it was safe. Every test showed that Jake's cabin was not just functional, but superior. The walls were stronger than most of the other shelters. The roof was completely waterproof. The heating system was both safe and efficient. "The thermal mass heater is particularly impressive," said Professor Mortek. "It shows an understanding of physics that most species don't develop until they have advanced technology." But what really amazed the professors was how livable Jake's cabin was. While the other students had created basic survival shelters, Jake had built a comfortable home. The furniture was well made. The storage systems were efficient. The whole space felt welcoming and peaceful. "This isn't just survival," said Professor Grextan. "This is thriving. The human has created a living space that's actually pleasant to be in." The professors asked Jake to explain his construction methods. He showed them how he had made tools from stones and wood. He explained how the log construction technique created strong, insulated walls. He demonstrated how the fireplace and chimney worked together to provide safe indoor heating. "Where did you learn these techniques?" asked Professor Zixthara. "From my father," Jake replied. "He taught me that humans have been building homes like this for thousands of years. Before we had modern technology, we had to use what nature provided." The professors were fascinated by Jake's explanation. They had never considered that a species might develop such advanced construction techniques using only natural materials. Most species either lived in simple shelters or used manufactured materials. "This represents a completely different approach to survival," said Professor Mortek. "Instead of adapting to the environment, humans adapt the environment to themselves." The final evaluation scores were announced. Each student had received good marks for completing the assignment. But Jake's score was unlike anything the professors had ever given. He had received perfect marks in every category, plus bonus points for innovation and advanced technique. "Jake Thompson," Professor Zixthara announced, "you have achieved the highest score in the history of this course. Your work demonstrates abilities that we didn't know your species possessed." The other students clapped for Jake, but their applause was mixed with amazement and respect. They had learned something important about humans. The species they had thought was weak and poorly adapted was actually incredibly capable. "I understand now," said Vexmar. Humans don't have natural tools like claws or strong bodies, but they can make better tools than any of us have naturally. And they think differently, added Clicktar. While we accept our environment, they change it to suit their needs. Word of Jake's achievements spread quickly through the academy. Professors from other departments came to examine his cabin. Students from advanced classes wanted to learn his techniques. The human exchange student had become the most talked about person on campus. Within days, Jake received an invitation that surprised everyone. The Advanced Survival Council, which included the most respected professors from across the galaxy, wanted him to present his techniques to their annual conference. This is extraordinary, Professor Zixthara told Jake. The council has never invited a student to present before. Usually, only professors with decades of experience are asked to speak. Jake felt nervous but excited. He had come to the academy to learn, but now he was being asked to teach. He spent several days preparing his presentation, with help from Professor Zixthara and other faculty members. The presentation day arrived. The conference hall was filled with professors, researchers, and survival experts from hundreds of different species. Many had traveled from distant planets just to hear about the humans' revolutionary shelter techniques. Jake stood at the front of the massive hall, looking out at an audience unlike anything he had ever seen. There were crystalline beings like Professor Zixthara, floating gas entities, insectoid creatures, and species he had never encountered before. Honored members of the council, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall sound system. My name is Jake Thompson, and I'm here to share what my father taught me about human survival techniques. Jake explained how humans had developed log construction over thousands of years. He showed holographic images of his cabin and explained each technique step by step. He demonstrated how to make tools from natural materials and how to build safe indoor heating systems. But most importantly, Jake explained the philosophy behind human survival techniques. Other species adapt themselves to their environment. He said, humans have learned to adapt the environment to themselves. We don't just survive. We find ways to be comfortable and happy even in difficult places. The audience was fascinated. Many species had never considered that survival could be about more than just staying alive. The idea that you could actually improve your situation using only natural materials was revolutionary to them. After his presentation, Jake was surrounded by professors asking questions. They wanted to know more about human history, about other construction techniques, and about how humans had developed such advanced problem-solving abilities. Your species has remarkable potential, said Dr. Kelter, the head of the Survival Council. We would like to invite you to help us develop new courses for the Academy. Would you be interested in teaching other students these techniques? Jake was amazed. He had come to the Academy as a student, but now he was being offered a position as an instructor. I would be honored, he replied. Over the following months, Jake worked with the Academy's professors to create new courses. Environmental adaptation became one of the most popular classes at the school. Students from across the galaxy came to learn human techniques for improving their living conditions. Jake also began working with the Terran Colonial Administration, the organization responsible for human expansion into space. His experience at the Academy had given